This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And the maze is life. And my first guest, talking about a very specific uh, topic that a lot of us like hide underneath the table or covers, or we just put on a big smile and say it's okay. Um, Reverend Rachel Hollander and I are going to talk about depression. And I want you to know she wrote a book. I hope you all can see it. And I want you all to go out and buy it, uh, called From There to Here. And Rachel and I have talked about this offline, and it's a book that you don't necessarily have to read cover to cover to understand it. You can just open it up and pick a page and start writing. So, Reverend Rachel, I want to first thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And your dog is somewhere around, so if we hear barking or see a tail wagging, that's okay. Um, and I want to ask you a little bit to go back in history and tell us a little bit about who you are and how this book came about.
Well, I want to also add the tagline of the book. So it's From There to Here, an insider's guide to navigating the darkness. And that was really important to me because I wanted people to know that I'm shedding some light on some stuff that people don't want to talk about. And maybe not even don't want to talk about, but just don't talk about. And I'm trying to let folks know from the inside, this is what it's like to live with depression. Operative word being live with. This is what it's like to live with depression. And so I just wanted to clarify that. So the question was, how did I get to this book? Yes. So I became 58 years old this year, and I have lived with depression my entire life. And I have done really well at times, and I have done not so well at times. And often, what I found, the part of navigating it, I wasn't always that good at it. And so, about 7 years ago, a little over 7 years ago, I just started writing. And a friend said, you should write this book. And actually, what came to mind was a book, like from beginning to end and filled with stuff. And it was just like, that was too daunting. That was too big for me. So what I did was I just started writing short pieces and started collecting those pieces, like 2 or 3 pages of, today was difficult. Why was today difficult? Well, because it seems like at 3:30 every day, the shadows come in, and I don't know why. About 3:30, 3:45 every day, depression just lands. And so I wrote a piece about that. And I wrote a piece, just a collection of different pieces. And then I decided to add some memoir into it. So some stories from my childhood, stories about my dad who died when I was 12, stories about my time in New York when I was in a psych unit, and just started sharing that. And then I had a wonderful friend who edited it, and she was like, okay, let's put this all together. And then it just kept morphing and transforming. And so finally this year, the book is alive.
And the book is going to grow. I want people to understand that it's sort of, and I read the first couple pages of it. And what I was seeing is, I can read this today, and this is how I'm going to feel. I can read this a couple of hours from now, and I may feel differently.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It would be helpful if I could understand those differences. And one of the things I heard you talk about was that every day about 3:30, 3:45, the shadows come in. And it rang a bell for me that early on in my marriage, my husband traveled. And so usually Monday through Thursday, he was out of town. And I'd go to work Monday morning and I was fine. and I come home from work, and all of a sudden I wasn't fine because he wasn't there. I wasn't making dinner for him. Um, it was before cell phones. And so I was dependent on waiting for him to call me. And it was long distance. And if people don't understand what long distance is, that meant it cost extra to make a phone call. Um, and so by 7, 8 o'clock at night, I was almost manic about it. Like, he hasn't called. Is he with another woman? Did he have an accident? Where is he? And I just like put it in the back of my mind. But by the time he'd come home on Thursday nights, I was crazed. I mean, he'd walk in the door, and even though we had talked during the week, when he'd come in the door, I like read him the riot act. And he, back in those days, he was more laid back, and it'd be like, oh, I get it. She missed me. And we never dealt with it.
Yeah.
And just hearing you talk about that, it's like, wow, that's something that I should have dealt with back then. But I've grown out of it, but it doesn't mean that it can't come back.
Well, and I talked with a few people about this, and it really resonated because it's like, you get up, even if you're not a morning person, you get up and it's like the day's starting, and I've got things to do, and I can do laundry, and I can do this, and I can do that. And it's, for some reason, at 3 o'clock, it's like the day's over. I'm not going to start laundry at 3 o'clock. I'm not going to do, a project at 3 o'clock. And suddenly it's like, oh, well, what's the point? It's over. The day is done. And when that purposefulness is gone, there's a void, there's a vacuum. And if I don't fill that vacuum with something productive and positive and healthy, then the depression, which I refer to as the worst roommate ever, the depression will fill that void for me with all kinds of stories and messages and memories and ideas that are not going to help me get through the rest of the evening.
So for you, you plan to fill the void.
It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
I sometimes will talk with the worst roommate ever. I'll just be like, come on, could you do a dish? Could you wash a dish, please? Because the dishes are piling up, Or I'll think, okay, so I'm done with all of my daily tasks at about 3 o'clock. Why don't I cook something? Why don't I plan to cook something? And so then and I'm not a good cook, but I will, put that plan into place, or I will make plans to talk to somebody on the phone. So that there's something there, or it doesn't have to be external. It can just be like, well, why don't we sit? Why don't we just sit in the quiet, and why don't we just listen and hear what comes up? And that's one of the big things about learning to live with depression, is that if sadness comes up, if tears come up, if pain comes up, that's okay. It doesn't have to be the end of our lives. It really doesn't have to be the end of our lives. It can be, wow, at 10 a.m., I felt great. And right now at 4 p.m., I don't feel so great. And you know what the famous story is? This too shall pass. And it does. It does. Even the people that I talk to who are dealing with some of the darkest moments, and even I personally who have dealt with some of the darkest moments, those aren't happening now. So things do pass. Things do shift. And sometimes we have to sit in it. Sometimes I have to sit in it. I just have to I referred to it last week. I called a friend and I said, the tsunami of sadness is coming over me. And she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I need to just sit and let it do it. I just needed. And so the tsunami of sadness came over, and I cried and I curled up in a ball and I just felt it. And then a couple hours later, I took my wonderful dog Maddie for a walk, a nice slow walk, and just felt like, okay, okay, you survived it. What's next? What's next?
Don't you think that sometimes when this sadness comes over us, whatever it is, that many of us try to ignore it because we don't want to know where it's going to go. Um, and we may be lucky enough to roll it into a ball and pack it away and say, okay, I'm all right now. But because we didn't do, like you said, roll into a ball, sob your eyes out, let it all out, and then get up and say, slowly, I'm going to do this. And as you slowly took that walk, you were gaining your strength back. But I know for myself, I'll get all upset and then I'd be like, oh, I don't have time to be upset now. I've got to put this aside.
I've got things to do.
Yeah. And I'm not doing those things well.
Right.
And I don't know that I'm not doing them well until later on.
Right.
And then that can depress me just as much. Why didn't I take the time I needed? I wouldn't have to redo everything and I wouldn't have to feel bad again. But sometimes we don't have choices.
Right. Right. I think I wrote down, I do this so that I don't forget and I don't interrupt. I write things down. And I wrote down ignore, deflect, and fix. We will try to ignore it. We'll try to deflect it with something else, or we'll try to fix it. And there's no fixing, and sometimes we don't have the choice. When I worked full time in a job that I hated, if I woke up and I knew that I was deep in it, oh well, put on your big girl pants, Rachel, and go to work. Now, throughout the day, I might go into the bathroom and cry and then splash some water on and go back out. I would always find a way, though, at some point, either during the day or later that day, to let it happen. Because, it's there's a great phrase, what we resist persists. So you keep trying to resist that, and it's just going to keep poking at you and poking at you until you're in the middle of the post office and you suddenly fall apart. Or I, not you. I suddenly am in the post office and I say, so it's important, if we can't deal with it in the moment that we'd like to, it's important to say that I'm going to make an appointment. I'm going to make an appointment. And at 10:30 tomorrow morning, there's nothing on my schedule. I'm going to let myself feel everything for about 15 minutes. And then I'm going to check in. How do I feel? Do I still need more time? Okay. About 10 more minutes of really being in it. Okay. Am I ready to maybe drink a glass of water? Am I ready to just be gentle and sort of come back? And all of these practices that I'm talking about come from years of not being able to do that.
Right.
This is new. This is only in the last, I would say, 10 years that I've been able to really know how to do this. It used to just flatten me. The depression would just flatten me and I could not function. And so the only choice I had was mask. I would put this mask of being okay on. And as you pointed out, what happens is the mask looks great, but underneath the mask, I'm decaying.
Right.
I'm imploding. And at some point that mask is going to just fall right off. And then I'm left with what's there. So it's taken a lot of practice, and I never, ever belittle anyone's experience or say to anybody, well, you should just go for a walk, because that's actually in the book. That's one of the things never to say to somebody. I have a list of things in the book, a list of do's and don'ts, and a list of things you should say and things you shouldn't, because the book is targeted towards two audiences. It's targeted toward people like you and I, who are in it and working to stay alive. And it's targeted to people who love us, who are like, I have no idea how to deal with this. Why don't you just, get off your pity pot? Why don't you just go for a walk? Why don't you just change? Or the worst, oh, are you feeling that again? I thought we were done with that. So there are things to say and things not to say. And that includes what we say to ourselves.
So you grew up in a family with three other sisters. And the little bit that I know, because I talked to your sister Anita, and she's adorable and wonderful. Early on, your parents introduced you to theater and music and gave you the opportunities to be part of it. They didn't force it. It was like, here, this is an opportunity. You don't want it? That's okay. You want it? Let's go for it. So luckily you didn't have a backstage mom. And
the only exception to that was one time my dad was driving my sister Lisa and I to an audition. Lisa was auditioning for The Sound of Music, and I was not. I just went along for the ride. And on the drive there, my dad said, "What do you mean you're not auditioning? Of course you're auditioning." And I was like, "I don't have anything prepared." And he's like, "You know the lyrics to You Are My Sunshine?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Sing that." And fortunately, we both got cast, because I would have felt bad if I had gotten in and she didn't. But we both got cast, and we got to be sisters in Sound of Music.
Oh, well, hey, that all worked out perfectly. But for the most part, really,
For the most part, never.
They were laid back. They allowed you to do your things. But about what time in your life do you think that you actually noticed that? I don't know if you called it depression back then, but something's just not right.
So it's interesting you would ask that, because I was looking through my old journals and I found a diary from when I was 10 where I'd written the words, "I'm so depressed." And I don't remember that I knew that word. I have no recollection of that. What I can say is that from early on, I remember that I felt different from people. And I know everybody has some level of feeling about that. I really felt like there would be days that I would look out my bedroom window and I would see the world turning and everyone living their life. And I would feel like I was not a part of that. Or that if I wasn't here, would it make a difference? And so there was like just a kind of a sadness, which was odd because there was nothing wrong with my life. And then when I was 10, I was bullied for an entire school year, just relentlessly bullied. And that must be where I found the word. So I see 10 as the beginning of awareness of it. And then when I was 12, my dad died. And that was my hook. That was my hook. Now I could say, oh, I feel this way because my dad died. Because before then, I didn't have any excuse. I just felt it. And so then everyone else in the world kind of felt that was the hook. Well, Rachel's depressed because her dad died. And so I didn't have to do any deeper exploration about the depression because it was just like, well, that's why. And I think it wasn't until probably I was 12, probably 12 years later, I was 24, and I was hospitalized in New York City for depression. And that's when one of the amazing nurses on staff, she really started helping me dig deep. And she's like, this wasn't just your dad. And I said, no, it wasn't. But I don't know how to explain what it was. So I don't have the words for it. I just know that it was always there. I was probably born with it. there are a few hints that lead me to believe that it's chemical and I was just born into it.
Well, and the interesting part is that um, when you talk about feeling different, uh, I had a lot of those same experiences growing up. When I look back, it's like I really wasn't any different. Um,
Right.
what I thought was being that what I thought meant that I was being bullied when I was younger. Now that I look back, um, I think I bullied myself more than other people bullied me, but it made me aware now as an adult. Wait a second, I need to look differently at things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if somebody says something to me that triggers me, are they really bullying me? Am I being overly sensitive? Is it something else? And maybe I don't have an answer for it, but I can't always get angry at someone else because all of a sudden now I'm not feeling right. And I didn't understand that most of my life. Um, I remember as a teenager telling my mother that I think I had to see a psychiatrist. She looked at me and she said, "Well, you don't need to see a psychiatrist. You know, there's nothing wrong with you." And I said to her, "Well, all my girlfriends are dating. I'm really not dating. You know, um, I'm thin, but I'm not thin enough." And I went through a whole dialogue, and she said, "You'll grow out of it." And that was her generation.
Right.
Realize that, okay? But I held it against her for a long time because it was like, "Oh, I'm telling you something. I need you to listen to me." Um, and so for our listeners out there, I want them to understand that there are generational gaps that don't even understand depression,
Mm-hmm.
and um, some of them don't want to. And there's nothing you can do if somebody doesn't want to. We can try to make them aware, but we can't force it on them the same way they can't force us not to be depressed if something hits us.
And my experience was almost the opposite of yours because my mom was ready to offer me therapy. And in my mind, it was, well, why talk about it? Nobody can fix it. Nobody can change it. So instead of taking her up on her generous offer, I write about this in the book. A year after my dad died, one of my friends said to me, "You have to stop crying," because I had been dark. I mean, I was goth pre-goth, and and it was causing a strain on those around me. And when I heard that, my first thought was, "Oh my God, I'm going to lose my friends." And so what I became in eighth grade, which then went through eighth grade through senior year, was I became the goofiest girl. And I was voted the goofiest girl every year. I was outlandish. I was over the top. I was loud. I was funny. I dressed up on holidays. I, was always doing comedy and, always on, always on. And that was the big mask because underneath that there was just gaping emptiness that, again, like my mom was like, "Do you want to talk to somebody? Do you want to see a therapist?" "No, no, no, I'm fine. I'm fine." And I was the opposite of fine. And so what I talk about in the book, though, is in retrospect, I'm so grateful to the goofiest girl because she kept me alive. She kept me alive. And so even though sometimes when I'm at a high school reunion and somebody brings up something that I did, I'm like, "Oh, okay, did I do that?" It's okay because she was stronger than I was, and I let her take the lead.
Well, and I think that shows a very healthy side. You may not have thought it was a healthy side. Um, and maybe when you went into the hospital in New York, you may have thought, hey, I've been hiding it all this time, be, underneath all the laughter, but it was a survival mechanism.
Yes.
We all have those. Okay. Um, you know, I was always the person, I have to make everybody happy, because if I make everybody happy, I'm going to be happy. And I first learned with my first divorce, uh, first, my only divorce, but my divorce from my
Just
first,
say the only one.
yeah, um, that I was trying so hard to make him and his family happy.
Mm,
And his mother was never going to like me. She basically told that to me and my parents. Um, and he just wanted to have a wife.
mm,
And I was doing all the wifely things. And when I realized I wasn't happy, um, I did implode.
yeah.
Okay. We were out at a bar with another couple, and I just like let it all out. And looking back, it was like, what the hell did I do? Um, but it probably was the best thing that I could have done,
Yes.
because it came out and then I had to deal with it. And dealing with it meant that we got divorced. Dealing with it meant I had to really find all new friends and, go on with my life. And I did go on with my life. Um, but, you know, it's not about making other people happy.
Yes. So interestingly, again, this is in the book. I write about when I was in the hospital. When I went into the hospital, I went in as the model patient. I took care of everybody. I was like an ambassador. Other patients' families would come and I would greet them. Like they thought I worked there. And I was just, everything was okay and make sure everybody's okay. And the nursing staff was like, Rachel, do you know why you're here? And I'm like, oh, because I'm depressed. It's okay, and I just managed everyone. And they were getting ready to release me after being there for, I don't know, 3 weeks. They were like, well, there's nothing we can do. I present well. I made sure everybody was okay. And then December 15th, it was 1987, there was a young woman on the unit who was the same age as me who took the elevator up to the roof and jumped. And that, for me, that was the moment. That was the moment I realized I need I need help, because my first reaction to what she did wasn't, "Oh, that's so terrible." It was, "I am so jealous." My first thought was, "She is so courageous and I am a weak, whiny baby." That's not a healthy response to that.
Right.
That moment should have been me grieving her, and instead I was angry at myself for not being as strong as her. And that's when I knew there's a problem. And things definitely shifted then, and I won't give it away because it's a
You
very
have to read
interesting
the book.
story in the book. However, that triggered something else that then triggered a whole series of things that got me to here now. And so I'm grateful, not for that young woman doing that. I'm grateful for the nurses who listened to me. And I'm grateful that something happened that was enough to snap me out of my own, whatever that was, to say enough is enough. You need to be honest. Like you reach that moment where it was like, I need to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And this isn't appropriate, but I'm doing it right now. And that's kind of where it was at. I needed to get to the place of honesty, because otherwise I would have just spent my whole life faking, and that was not satisfactory.
So you spent three three weeks in the hospital or more?
Well, no, total I ended up I was there for 3.5 months. I was out for a month. Then I went back for a month. So, all total, about 5 months. And this was in New York City. And so, my claim to fame is in order to be released from the hospital, I had to move away. I had to leave New York. So basically, I was kicked out of New York City because they weren't going to release me from the hospital unless I agreed to leave. It wasn't healthy for me to live there. And they had released me once, and a month later, I ended up back in. So they were like, nope, we're not doing that again. So we either put you somewhere permanently or you get out. And I was like, I'm getting out. So I left New York.
So what took you to New York? Let's go back to that.
So I saw my first Broadway show when I was 3 years old. I saw Oliver sitting on my mother's lap, and saw my first Shakespeare production when I was 10. And I loved the theater. I loved the theater. And I grew up in a family of music and theater. And so when I was graduating from high school, barely, the counselor told my mom, look, just put her in theater. She can't do anything else. So I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't do that for a little while, but then I finally figured it out. And so I went to New York to go to the American Musical and Dramatic Academy. And my sister Anita was there, and she was doing all kinds of cool cabaret performances and introducing new music to the world. And she knew all these people who were writing new musicals. And so I kind of fell into a community and my school. However, New York was not a place that I should ever live. Visiting, great, but living there is not something I should ever do. So that's what got me there. And then my mental health got me out.
Well, and we all have these dreams of who we think we want to be when we grow up. And I've had lots of them.
Yeah.
And I still have some dreams of who I want to be when I finally grow up. I don't know when that's going to be, but hey, well, it's fun to dream. But
Yes.
sometimes our depression kicks in because somebody will burst our bubble telling us you're never going to be that. That cannot happen. And one of the themes that we have here at New Cleveland Radio is that we talk a lot about who you are is not your age, it's not your birthday, and it's not necessarily that reflection you see in the mirror. It's the person inside. And sometimes we have to really let that person out, like I did that night in the bar.
Yes.
Um, and again, I agree, very inappropriate, but I was such an appropriate person that, that now that I look back, I can understand why that happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Being appropriate wasn't working for me.
Right.
And I had to do something to get myself out of there. And it's important that we all accept the fact that even though we may not use the word depression, we all experience some form of depression during our life. Um, we go through sadness, we go through changes, we go through losses. And I'm not necessarily saying it's the loss of a parent or a spouse or a child.
The
It
loss
could
of
be
anything.
loss of a job or the loss of your dream, going to New York or any number of things. Um, when I lost my job from corporate America, even though it was killing me, um, that's when I went into my biggest state of depression. And it wasn't about the job itself, it
Yeah.
was that whole bundle of things that came out because I said, you know what? I need therapy. I need therapy. And I didn't want medication necessarily that was going to lull me. I said, I just need to take the edge off. I need to be able to think. Um, and luckily, I found a team that worked with me,
Great.
uh, didn't drug me to the point of, hey, you can go into la la land. Um, and I had a family that supported me. However, I will say at the time, my mother was, I believe, 92 or 93. And the
Wow.
first question she said to me was, "Why are you depressed?" And I looked at her and I said, "I have a million and one reasons,
Yeah.
and I don't have to explain them to anybody." And
Yeah.
that's,
You can have a million and one reasons or no reason.
well, that's true.
Yeah. It can just be. Everything can be going stellarly beautiful and wonderful, and it's still there. I talk about it in the book as the hum. Like if you have fluorescent lights going and if you get really quiet, you can hear those fluorescent lights humming. That's what the depression is. It's just this constant hum. And some days I don't hear it, and some days it's super loud. So yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah,
No,
that's the
no,
idea.
that is true. Yes.
Sometimes we don't need a reason to be depressed. It just is. Like, nobody asks if you have a reason to be diabetic. You're diagnosed with diabetes. You live with diabetes.
Right.
You live with depression. It's not something that
It
is
doesn't,
going to be cured or healed or gone away. It's part of who I am, and that's okay. Now it's okay. Many times it was not. Now it is.
so you started your own podcast, and um, that's that's how your sister Anita really connected with me about you. Um, she said, my sister Rachel does a podcast all by herself. I said, what is she doing there? She talks. And I thought, okay. So um, I went out and started listening, especially after you and I talked, and was like, I like this because it's it's not rambling, but it's telling us where you are in the moment,
Yeah.
or what you felt, what happened to you yesterday, or a flashback that's come through. And I encourage our listeners to go out to your site because you can find a piece of yourself
Mm.
along the road.
That's nice to hear. That's nice to hear.
And, and I encourage people that it's not shameful to say you're depressed. It's not shameful to say that you've gone through treatment or you're going through treatment. Um, I think it makes us stronger because we're trying to fit in, but we're trying to fit in our own bodies.
Yeah. There's a little bit of fitting in with the world, and there's a lot of fitting in with who am I? Who do I want to be? Well, thank you for that about the podcast. It was an act of frustration during a pandemic when I couldn't get the book finished, and I you were talking about like hearing a no or hearing a negate. Like here I was writing a book about living with depression, and the person who was coaching me was like, "It's not ready." I'm like, "It is ready. It is ready." It wasn't ready, and so she said, "Look, just start a podcast." I thought, you can't just start a podcast, and she said, "Yeah, you actually can." And so I bought myself a little bitty mic, and I just started telling my life story. How I got from there to here, and with little bits of here along the way from there to here. And it's been really great. What I hear from people similarly to what you're saying is, it's like, oh, I could relate to that, or that was really interesting, or, that was something I didn't know. And mostly just that it's okay to be who we are and to be as we are. And one of the things that I stress in the podcast and in the book is I'm kind of a I don't want to say bully because that's not a nice word, but I'm very picky about semantics. And so you will never hear me say I have depression or my depression, because I don't own it and it's not mine. I will always say I experience depression or the depression or the worst roommate ever. And so, or I will say that I struggle with it. I will never say I suffer from it, because suffering to me is something that I either choose to do or not do. I can struggle and it can suck. Oh my God, it can suck. However, I have the choice to suffer or not. And for many years, I was the victim of depression. It had its thumb on me. And I suffered and I suffered and I suffered until I learned, okay, so there's a difference between suffering and struggling. And I'm going to choose struggling, because that gives me hope.
And what I talk about is it's been my challenge.
Great. That's
And,
another great word.
you know, it doesn't have to stop me. At times I have to take a step back. That doesn't mean I can't keep going forward. Um, and when we first started talking about depression on New Cleveland Radio, I'll never forget, I had a cousin of mine send me a text saying, "Why are you bringing up such sad things?" And I said, "The world has sad things going on in it. But what we're talking about is how to navigate through that sadness so that you can smile, so you can feel good, so that the people around you feel more comfortable around you as well." I said, "But I remember as a young child, um, my parents called me a crybaby. And now I think back and I was depressed. I wasn't fitting in somehow. Yeah, you do. Um, and, you know, it upset me when they'd call me that, but I was crying a lot. Okay. Um,
Right.
it'd be like, "Why are you sitting over in that corner?" Well, maybe I felt comfortable there, but the way it was asked of me, I would start to cry, like, "Why can't I sit in this corner?" Um, and my brothers still remind me of that at times, but, now we can laugh about it. But we don't know what's going on in somebody else.
Right.
And I think you said it in the beginning, you choose not to judge other people or question what they're feeling. You know, it's if that's what you feel, that's what you feel. What I'm learning to do is try to figure out, where am I feeling it? Am I feeling it in my head? Am I feeling it in my stomach? Where? So that maybe I can get rid of it. Maybe it's easy. Maybe it's on my hands and I can just go wash it off. But if it's deep down inside of me, it's going to take longer. And if I have two little things sitting on my shoulders,
Right.
battling with each other, um, that could take even longer. Now, you talked about the nurses at the hospital, but you didn't talk about the doctors.
Oh, because they were the worst. They were the worst. I will say I had one intern who didn't know what to do with me, and he did try. He did try, and he was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because the chief psychiatrist, bless his heart, he's in the wrong field. He was in the wrong field. And he made some really bad decisions in regard to my treatment. And so here was this intern who was trying to connect with me, but he was being told by the chief, "You have to do this." The nurses, boots on the ground, they were with all of us 24/7. They knew us, they cared about us, and they were amazing. And I would say that they saved my life. absolutely. There were two or three in particular that absolutely saved my life. The second time I was in the hospital, I had a different intern who was absolutely horrible, and he was on his psych rotation. He didn't want to be there, and he actually said to me, "You need to just get over it." And I'm like, I'm in a psych unit, dude. Like, where are you? But what happened was about a year or 2 years later, I went back to New York for a visit and I had lunch with one of the nurses. And she told me that that intern, shortly after his rotation with us, had a complete emotional breakdown and was hospitalized at a different psych unit in New York. And she said when he came back, he chose to go into psychiatry. And she said when he came back on their unit, he was the most compassionate, kind, gentle. She said he would sit with patients, he would hold their hand. She said the transformation was remarkable because he experienced it. And I think that that's a huge piece of this is why I wrote the book, partly for people who've never experienced it, because they just don't know. And I don't blame anybody for not knowing. In fact, consider yourself grateful if you don't know what it's like on the inside. I just want you to, I want you to know so that we can be gentler with each other and we can be kinder to each other. And so no one has to experience that kind of thing. So yeah, kudos to the nurses. They rocked it. They were amazing.
Well, it was interesting how, I just kept hearing nurses, nurses, no doctor. Um, and I find it interesting because when um, I was looking for a therapist, um, when I had this breakdown after corporate America, um, at first, nobody knew who to send me to. You live in Cleveland, Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital, Metro. You don't know who to send me to. There's nobody available, which I found strange. Um, then I was sent to some clinic down in, I think they were in Brecksville someplace.
Mm.
And the first thing the psychiatrist said to me was, before he even let me talk, he wanted to put me on medication. And he was talking about, now this is 10 years ago. So we're talking, well, not quite 10 years ago, more like 8 years ago, it was 2013. He was talking about shock therapy. I said, whoa, I'm out of here. I said, I may be depressed, but I got a brain. I can hear what you're talking about. I came here to talk to you and work through some issues. And you're talking about heavy duty medication and shock therapy. You just gave me a shock and I walked out.
And I'm out.
Yeah. And when I got the bill, I wrote a letter saying, I'm not paying this bill because
Wow.
this was just like
Wow.
inappropriate.
Yeah.
Um, but then I finally found a therapist, and she was wonderful because the first thing when I came in, she said, so what do you expect? And I said, I expect you to help me. And she said,
What did she say?
wrong, wrong. She said, you're going to help you
Yes.
and I will guide you, but
Yeah.
you are going to help you. And I looked at her and I thought, oh, I'm going to walk out.
You're supposed to fix me. What's the matter with you?
Um, but when she finally explained it to me, she said, Karen, I'm not in your shoes
Yeah.
and I'm trained, but I'm trained to guide you.
Yeah.
And she said, and if you need medication, here's the person who you're going to talk to. And you're going to repeat some things to them that you've said to me. And please understand that that's the way it goes. And when she explained the whole process, it was like, you're the right person for me. And I would go to her for, I think the first time I went for about 6 months. And then I just said to her, I need to take a break.
Yeah.
I need to see what I can do. how I can do it on my own. I said, I've got your number. And I went back about 4 months later for a couple of months. It was my refresher.
Yes.
Um, and I keep her number close by. I haven't been back in about 3 years now. Um, and that doesn't mean that a refresher wouldn't hurt,
Right.
um, but you have to be ready for it. And that's the one thing that I know. If you're not ready, all the therapy in the world is a waste of time,
Exactly.
energy.
Exactly. I find it interesting that that psychiatrist jumped to ECT so quickly. Um, I won't talk too much about it, but it is in the book that I went through 7 sessions of it. Um, my motivation for choosing it was a little different than the hospital's motivation. I was hoping it would kill me, and it actually did. It actually did. I was supposed to have 8 to 10 treatments, and on the 7th treatment, I died, and they had to revive me. And they decided at that point that I should probably not do that anymore. Um, and I will say, I have some really strong opinions about it from my own experience, and also from many people that I've talked with. That I believe that ECT can be very effective for people living with schizophrenia and other disorders, other mental illnesses, I have a friend who has MS, and she gets ECT to help rewire herself. I don't see how it's ever going to be effective for someone with depression, and yet it's still being used. Obviously, just 8 years ago. And the fact that it was so cavalierly offered to you, it hurts my heart. Because it's not a lasting solution, and it does cause lasting damage. And so I can get pretty mouthy about it.
Well, we may do that in the future. So tell everybody how they can find your personal podcast.
So everything is now being found on my new and improved and beautiful website that my friend Victoria designed. It's at Rev, R-E-V as in Valerie, Rev Rachel Hollander. And Rachel is just Rachel, no extra letters, no umlauts, no silent Qs, just RevRachelHollander.com. And on that website, you can get information about ordering the book. You can find the podcast. You can find other writings I've done, and read a little bit about me. And right now, the book is only available through me. I keep joking that my dining room has become my own personal Amazon. Right now, the book is only through me. So just go to the website, click on the book, contact me. I will pack it and ship it. I will inscribe it personally and get it to you ASAP.
That is terrific. And what I'm hoping that we can do as we move forward, get to know a little bit more about you have a service dog and how how that is helpful. Because a lot of people don't know if they qualify, don't qualify, what a service dog does. It's not a service snake or a spider or any of those things that some people like to
Ostrich.
carry around. um, and I also, at some point, want to learn more about how you became Reverend Rachel Hollander.
That's a great
Um,
story.
I, so there's so much more to learn. Um, and I just want our listeners to know that there's so much more out there for all of us. And
That's the thing. Just there's an AA phrase, don't give up 10 minutes before the miracle. And I actually learned that phrase from a book about depression that a man named Douglas Block wrote. And I read that and I thought, wow, that's powerful. That's powerful. So just wait 10 minutes. Okay. And sometimes it's waiting increments of 10 minutes over and over again. Just don't give up yet. Don't give up yet.
there's a lot of living to do. And if you had given up or I had given up, we wouldn't be here today. And I'll
Right.
tell you, you are you have a very special place in my heart.
Thank you.
And I talk about you all the time, so your ears should be burning.
Thank you so much. Well,
But
and one of the things that I would love to talk with you about in the future, and I'm writing it down so I don't forget, is gratitude. Once we start talking about gratitude, that's a whole hour in itself.
I I look forward to it. Have a great day. Give Molly, right?
Maddie.
Maddie. Well, I knew it
Maddie.
started with an M.
She's
Give
down there.
give Maddie a pat for us. And when you take your walk later today, just think of beautiful things if you can.
I will. Thank you so much. That's her. Thank you so much. We'll talk again.
Bye bye now.
Bye.